spinning. So yes, hey everyone. I don't know who's here yet. We're just getting set up, and let's see. Okay. All right. Welcome everybody, welcome. So we are going to do a little bit of a Q&A today. This is a bit of a test, some new technology, and hopefully it all works. And I've got one of my fabulous team members, Stephanie, here with me today. And so we're just sort of testing the technology, and we've got our Zoom meeting open, but we're also live streaming on to YouTube right now. So, okay, so on YouTube, I can see Eddie and Tony are joining us. Welcome. And we're going to do a little bit of a Q&A. We have got some questions that have been pre-submitted, but if you are joining us live, you're welcome to post a question in the chat. We're going to hang out for about 20 minutes, maybe half an hour, and we will answer as many questions as we can. And one of the things that I also want to make sure I talk a little bit about is a very special membership promo offer that I've got at the moment. So the annual rate of my membership is discounted right now. It's on sale. You can save 20%. And I'm just going to post the link for that in the chat in the various places, so that if you're interested in that, I think Steph is all over it. So Steph, if you can post it into the YouTube chat, that would be great. Thank you. That is where I think people will see it. We're just doing some technology testing, and then to thank you all for your time and attention, we're going to take some questions. So I see Cara is here and Tonio is here. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you all doing with the astrology right now? Are you feeling excited about Saturn coming into Pisces? Are you nervous about it? Are you looking forward to Pluto coming into Aquarius? I know there's a lot going to be happening over the next few weeks astrologically. And let's see where we're at. So it might be something I need to do, Steph. So let me try. So for those of you who are interested in the membership, annual rate on sale right now, I'm going to just share the link in the chat. So you can pop over to my website, kellysastrology.com, or use that direct link to the sales page, and you can save 20% off the annual fee with the code annual20. So with that said, we do have some questions that have come in advance, and Steph and I are going to go through them very shortly. And if you are here on the live call and you have a question, you're welcome to post about it in the chat, and we will answer as many as we can. So Steph, over to you. What question should we start with?
Awesome. All right, here we go. The first question is, it says, I'm already nervous about the Venus retrograde, and how should I plan?
Oh, that's such a great question. So first of all, I don't think of Venus retrograde. It's not something that personally I think needs a lot of worry about. You know, this is different from a Mars retrograde. It's nowhere near as disruptive, maybe. I know many of us are coming off the back of that Mars retrograde in Gemini, which was very frenetic, very frantic, really disruptive. And so I totally appreciate it's like one retrograde to another. It must be equally unsettling. So part of the difference is, of course, Venus is a benefic planet. So she is a little more gentle. And while Mars retrogrades can activate some challenges or frustrations, Venus retrogrades sometimes delay the good. You know, if we get like a difficult experience with Venus retrograde, it tends to delay or reduce some of the good things. So it doesn't so much bring a problem, but it might just minimize some of the enjoyment. And that's only if you get like a worst case scenario from Venus retrograde. Venus is retrograde in the same zodiac sign on a regular pattern every 8 years, Venus is retrograde in Leo. So if the first thing to do, if you're worried about Venus retrograde in Leo in 2023, is to think back to July, August of 2015, which was the last time we had a Venus retrograde in Leo. And whatever topics or themes were perhaps really activated for you in that middle part of 2023, it's quite likely that you're returning to some of those topics and themes in the middle of 2023. So middle of 2015 to the middle of 2023, Venus retrograde is the link tying those two periods of time together. Now, you're 8 years wiser, 8 years older, and 8 years more experienced right now. So hopefully you have a little bit more maturity and self-awareness to navigate whatever topics might come up. Venus will actually spend about 4 months in the sign of Leo from June through to September. And so we're going to have lots of time to activate Venus in Leo things. One of the helpful ways to think about Venus in Leo retrograde for you is to look at the Leo part of your birth chart and think about how you could add more pleasure, comfort, enjoyment, or connection, like collaboration into this part of your life. A retrograde can sometimes slow things down, or it may act to kind of draw your attention to an area of your life that you're ready to go a lot deeper into exploring and learning about. So that's a few ways to think about Venus retrograde coming up in Leo. So I would plan for a deep dive about the Leo parts of your chart through the lens of Venus. How could I, and particularly Venus in Leo, how could I act from a place of that kind of regal confidence? How could I act from a place of I deserve respect or love or care or attention? I'm not saying we should all go and be demanding, individuals, but when we raise our standards, we do shift our dynamics with other people because we're sort of saying, actually, I won't be participating in those kinds of disrespectful behaviors. I want to build loyalty into my life with friends or professional collaborators or romantic partners. And that is, means we need some consistency or openness or whatever it might be. So there's a few thoughts about Venus retrograde. There's a lot, of course, that I could say about that. And I did go into a little bit more detail about that in my year ahead webinar. So if you feel like you need more on that, that's definitely a place to go for that. Thanks. Great question. Thanks for sharing that one, Steph. Where should we go next?
All right. This one we get a lot. When are you coming to Australia next?
Oh, such a great question. Well, I'm coming out real soon. Thank you to everyone in Australia who's asking. I will be in Sydney for March, for a big chunk of March. I'm actually attending a really fun family event, but I'm also going to be teaching a one-day workshop. So if you are in Sydney or Sydney is accessible to you, Friday, the 10th of March, I will be teaching in a place called Crow's Nest in Sydney, on the North Shore of Sydney. And I think we might have the link to share too, Steph, if that's something you could pop into the YouTube chat for anybody who might be interested. And if you're like watching this later and you can't find the link, just pop over to my website, kellysastrology.com, and under the calendar tab, just scroll down and you will find the details there. It's a timing workshop, Friday, March 10th. It's an all day, like 9 till 4 thing. We'll be doing some transits and looking at perfections as well. I'm usually in Australia once a year. I did spend a good chunk of the start of 2022 in Australia, but I chose not to do any work events at that time. It was my first time back after the pandemic kind of, travel pause. And so I just wanted to focus on being in Sydney and seeing family and doing Aussie summer holiday things. But yeah, I'll be back in just a few weeks, actually. And I look forward to seeing many of you there then. So thank you. So exciting. Where shall we go next, Steph?
Perfect. I did put the link in the chat in case anyone needs that. The next question is, this person said, my MC, so my midheaven, actually falls in my 11th house. Is the 10th house still a career house for me?
That's a great question. So when the midheaven is like in whole sign houses, whole sign charts, I should say, or even in equal house charts, the midheaven degree is like a floating degree that is sometimes in the 10th house, but sometimes in the 9th or the 11th. And in more extreme location births, the midheaven can even be in the 8th or in the 12th house. And so what I will preface my answer with is you may get slightly different answers on this depending on which astrologer you ask. So me personally, I do tend to prioritize the midheaven degree and sign and house itself. So my interpretation is that midheaven place is the primary point to do with career, to do with life direction. So if your midheaven is not in the 10th house and it's in the 11th or the 9th house, the point of the midheaven is actually sort of importing those topics of career into whichever house or place it's in. And so I would say if your midheaven's in the 11th, that's actually the most important part of your chart to do with career, and the sign on the 11th house, or the midheaven as it's in the 11th. And what tends to happen is the topics of career become directed towards or involve the topics of the house that the midheaven does fall in. So if your midheaven's in the 11th house, this can be an indication of somebody who works in community or organizations. Sometimes there's a little bit of activism where it's about focusing on the things for the good of the collective. And so I would really think about, or even working with friends is another way that can come up if the midheaven is in the 11th house. So such a good question. Thank you. And I do have a webinar with a little bit more on if you're curious about this floating midheaven and how to work with it. So we'll share the link for that. But definitely work with those 11th house sign and house topics. Great question. Where to next, Steph?
Awesome. This one is in the chat, and a similar question came in beforehand about Saturn and Pisces. So this one that we got in originally said Gemini rising. What is your take on Saturn and Pisces in the 10th for a night chart? What is watery Saturn like? And then we got a very similar question through YouTube.
Yes. Okay. So I know Saturn in Pisces is such a kind of a contradiction, isn't it, in terms of the symbolism of Saturn versus the symbolism of Pisces. And one of the ways I'm approaching understanding this transit is about the managing the contrast of being in a place where you want stability, but maybe not having it. Or how do you find that kind of rock-like energy, which I always think of Saturn as like a big rock. And one of the images that I'm holding in my mind for the Saturn in Pisces, at least as we're starting it, is this idea of like a rock being dropped into a pond or a stream or a body of water. And, that rock is so solid and so heavy that it does fall to the bottom. And so there's something about Saturn in Pisces really bringing us down to foundations, to root cause or base level. What is at the very base or bottom, what is down in the depths, if you like. But also the idea of the rock. The other way I think about it, if you've got a stream, sometimes there are boulders or stones that you use to get across the stream. So there's something about, the boulders, of course, being Saturn, like the stepping stones. What are, little rituals of consistency or stability that might help us navigate this constant flow of energy as represented by the waters of Pisces, or even some of the chaos of Pisces? We know that Pisces is a sign that doesn't have a lot of boundaries, doesn't have a lot of containment. And so there's a couple of ways to approach this. What is the collective take of Saturn in Pisces versus how might Saturn in Pisces as a transiting thing affect my personal chart? And so when we're looking at the symbolism of Saturn and Pisces and rocks and water, we're really contemplating the collective theme and essence. And then when we're looking at, I have these planets in Pisces or I have these planets in Gemini, what might the transit of Saturn mean to me? And no matter what sign Saturn is in, it is still Saturn. So when you have transiting Saturn in Pisces making an aspect to your Virgo planet or your Gemini planet or your Pisces planet, you're still going to need to do some of that clarity and that reality checking around boundary setting, simplifying things, and kind of paring back to essentials. When we talk about it collectively, Saturn in Pisces is a lot about structures and systems and supports that provide help for those that might be suffering. So there's something about healthcare systems. There's something about people that require support for emotional conditions or emotional concerns. Saturn is the visible planet that is the furthest out, the farthest that we can see without a telescope. And Pisces, of course, is the last zodiac sign. And so there's something about Saturn and Pisces about endings or being at the limit of something or at a natural place of endings. And so when I think about, well, who in society might that represent? It is the elderly, people who are at the later stages of life. So Saturn in Pisces might bring themes forward about hospice care and end-of-life care, and how do we care for or not the elderly in our society. And so people who are at end of life could be those that are sick with terminal diseases of any age, or they could be those who have reached the natural end of life just by being, of a certain age, the elderly. And so I think Saturn in Pisces is going to bring up some things to do with that. But also, of course, Saturn in Pisces speaks a lot to getting serious about water quality, water equity. Does everybody have access to clean flowing water? And the answer to that is no. And often the reason is we don't have infrastructure, Saturn, roads or plumbing services to provide delivery of that safe, clean water. So I think there's going to be some conversations about that. And the other stuff that Pisces is connected to is gases. So gases and oils and these types of substances. And so Saturn in Pisces can activate things along those lines as well. So that's a little bit about some of the general things and then some of the personal things. I know one of the questions that we had, if you're a nighttime chart and wherever you have Saturn can be an area where things are a little bit more cumbersome or burdensome. Saturn, of course, being the out of sect or contrary to sect malefic if you're a nighttime chart. So if you're a Gemini rising with Saturn in Pisces in the 10th, that's going to, and I'm not clear from our question whether this is like natal Saturn or transit Saturn. I'm just going to go with transit Saturn because that's what I'm guessing based on the transit. Having Saturn coming to your 10th house is definitely a maturity cycle about career. It's about making honest and realistic choices to do with the work that you're doing in the world. But also a big concept about Saturn is that it makes things crystal clear and it helps you tell the truth about what really is and isn't working for you. Sometimes Saturn in the 10th house by transit will help you take on a new commitment in regards to your career or your professional path. Other times it indicates that there is a natural ending or transition point where you're ready to stop doing something and move towards something else. Usually to determine which way you're going to go, I would be looking at your progress chart and seeing what's going on there, particularly in your progressed moon phases. And the combination of the two would give me a guide as to, this Saturn transit's more about an ending, or that Saturn transit, you're ready to take that next challenge on professionally. So that's a little bit about that. Any more? Should we say any more on that, Steph? Or do you feel like that's given people a bit to think about for now?
I think that was great. Super helpful. Awesome. So next one, this one actually came into the chat, which I thought was a great question, is how do you read retrogrades in the natal chart?
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's a really good question. And so it would really depend on which planet is retrograde. So there are some planets in the birth chart that would be really significant if they're retrograde, and there are some planets in the birth chart that wouldn't be significant if they were retrograde. And so if you have an outer planet retrograde, for instance, like Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, I personally wouldn't get too caught up about that. The outer planets do spend a huge part of their time retrograde, so it's kind of just as normal for them to be retrograde as it is to be direct. Jupiter and Saturn, they are retrograde a little less, but it's still perhaps a little bit less significant if they are retrograde. The planets that I tend to really hone in on if they are retrograde in the birth chart are the three quicker moving planets, Venus, Mercury, and Mars. And mostly if they rule an angle like the ascendant or the midheaven, particularly a planet like Mercury, who spends a fair amount of time retrograde, that can change the nature of the planet, but it doesn't necessarily prevent you doing Mercury things. In my research looking at planets and retrogrades and the speed of the planets, the more kind of problematic part is the stations at the very start and at the very end of the retrograde. So you might have Mercury retrograde in the middle of its retrograde cycle where it's actually moving at a fair speed. It's just moving backwards. And in the same way a car can fairly effectively move backwards down a street, Mercury can be fairly effective, maybe in a more internal or thoughtful way, rather than that, like if you think introverted versus extroverted, that can be a way to connect with a planet that's retrograde. But the part that really indicates some substantial delays in a chart would be if you had Mercury, Venus, or Mars either stationing direct or stationing retrograde in your chart. And that can be something worth paying attention to. It's a much more specific and a much more short part of the retrograde cycle. In some of my research looking at relationships and seventh house experiences, having the ruling planet of the seventh house in station in the birth chart can show delays in terms of activating and experiencing the fullness of relationship topics. So there, so if I see a planet retrograde, depending on which planet it is, I might dig a little further. Otherwise, I'm just looking at the idea of that, this is a more subtle or internalized version of that planet.
Lovely. Here's a good one. Is it a day chart if the sun is barely above the horizon in the seventh house?
That's such a great question. So what this kind of brings up, so the sun is like just above the descendant in the seventh house, maybe within a few degrees of the descendant. This brings up what I call the difference between a technical definition of something versus a functional expression of something. And technically, that would still be a day chart because the sun is above the horizon. But if we use our kind of thinking brains, we'd realize that sun has got very low light, just before sunset, the sun is about to drop below the horizon. And so that is a transition point for the sun, of course. The sun is it's really the most accurate description of the time of day, if you like, for that chart would be day becoming night. And so in those instances, you can have the same problem or the same question come up around sunrise. If the sun is just below the ascendant within a few degrees, and that would be night becoming day. And at these transition points, when you have the sun near the ascendant or near the descendant, the chart is operating in a transition zone. And there's a few points to check out. One is to connect with the client or yourself, if it's your chart, and just see, do you have more problems or troubles to do with Mars or Saturn in your chart? And what you're doing there is almost testing, is my chart functionally more of a day chart, which would indicate you have more issues with Mars? Or is my chart functionally more of a night chart, which might indicate that you have more issues to do with Saturn? And you would literally just look at, I have Mars in the 11th house. Do I have issues with friends, for instance? Or I have Saturn in the 3rd house. Do I have issues with siblings, perhaps? That's a very simple way to go. You could also look at the topics of the houses ruled by Mars. So the topics of the houses where you have Aries and Scorpio, or the topics of the houses where you have that are ruled by Saturn. So where you have Capricorn and Aquarius. And if you're like, I definitely have more problems with friends, but I'm okay with my family, then it might be that, the Mars issues are more relevant for your chart. So there's a little bit of sort of an astro detective work that we can do there to kind of diagnose which way your chart might go. That's one way to work with it. And the other thing that I've come to appreciate with working with clients who are born in this transitional time is that those particular birth charts don't tend to have quite as clear distinction around the concepts of sect, because at the time of day the person was born, the distinction between day and night wasn't as clear. It was a little bit of this, but a little bit of that. And so I think there is like a gray area zone when the sun is a few degrees below the ascendant before it's risen, and when the sun is a few degrees above the descendant before it is set, where things could go either way. And sometimes it's not actually possible to make a determination just off the chart data. You need a little bit of feedback from the individual to go there. So that's how I would respond to that. Hopefully that's helpful, because I know I do get that question a lot in class.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Love that. Do you want to talk about, we have two questions about Pluto entering Aquarius. One's from an Aquarius rising, who's hoping for some positive, well, actually, sorry, go back. Any tips for Aquarius rising with Pluto entering the first house? And then similarly, another Aquarius rising was wondering about shifts in housing and work coming up for 2020.
Okay, Aquarius rising. So they're all okay, so much to say about the fixed sign charts, but of course, Aquarius rising for sure. So first and foremost, Saturn leaving the sign of Aquarius is definitely going to remove some pressure, some worry, some fear, or some restriction that Aquarius rising charts have been dealing with. Wherever we have Aquarius in our charts, Saturn's presence there over the last 3 years, it's really contained, it's really solid. There's a strictness, we've all had to be on a certain type of regime or regiment, and that's the nature of Saturn. And Saturn's coming into Pisces, so we're going to have to get structured in that part of our life. So that's a different thing for the mutable signs to watch and think about. But yeah, if you're Aquarius rising, keep in mind that the rising or the first house is also the place of life and vitality. And having Saturn there can temporarily reduce or diminish our vital sense or our vital feeling or our vital force. So I think Saturn leaving Aquarius is definitely going to be an improvement. Of course, then there's the concern, what about when Pluto arrives and what's that going to mean for me? And if you are Aquarius rising, you can test this out with the Saturn transit, and then that'll give you some info to work with the Pluto transit. Even though Saturn spent about 3 years in Aquarius, it would have only been on your ascendant degree for a maximum of about 12 months. And so when Pluto comes into Aquarius, it is going to spend about 2 decades, a good 20 years in Aquarius, but it'll be most impactful for you personally when it hits your ascendant degree. Now, what does having Pluto in the first house or over your ascendant mean? It does mean a really deep and profound, as well as a permanent transformation to do with your personality, to do with your sense of self, and often to do with your physical body as well. And so sometimes when people have Pluto near the ascendant, they undergo these major health overhauls. Sometimes they do have, a health situation come up that requires attention. Pluto in and of itself wouldn't be the only thing that I would look to for timing to indicate a major health situation. I would need to see some factors to do with the moon, as well as the ruling planet of the first house. And if we're talking about Aquarius ascendants, I'd also want to know what is going on with natal Saturn in the chart. And so with Aquarius rising and Pluto coming into the first house, be open to transformation, to not doing things the way you've done them before, and to exploring how you could do things differently in a way that gives you a little bit more power or feels closer to the essence and the core of who you are. You will be going on a really intense and at times all-consuming personal growth and self-development journey. That is the nature of having a big planet go through the first house. And if we have any Capricorn risings in the chat who are watching or listening to this afterwards and would like to share their experiences about what Pluto in the first has been like for them, we definitely love to hear, because that is, the group that is just coming out of this transit that would be so helpful for the Pluto in Aquarius team or the Aquarius rising team to get some more guidance around. All kinds of things, from surgeries that change health situations for the better. Sometimes it's about having a baby. Sometimes it's about entering into a really important relationship. Sometimes it's about leaving a relationship that's been in your life for a really long time. So the exact circumstances can be unique and different, but the essence is uncovering and connecting with your kind of inner power, and then figuring out how do you want to use that to live a more kind of authentic and true and empowered existence. So that's what I would say about Aquarius rising with Pluto coming into the first. But there was like a second part, Steph, wasn't there, about Aquarius rising, wanting some positive shifts for housing and work.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I always need a little chart wheel here. So Aquarius rising in the whole sign system, you'd have Taurus on your fourth house. And so the last few years have been maybe a little chaotic or unpredictable or full of unexpected changes in terms of your home and living situation, thanks to Uranus going through Taurus and your fourth house. I do think that Jupiter coming into Taurus, which happens in May of 2023 for 12 months, so from May 23 to May of 24, that will be helpful. It may not mean that there is necessarily less change, but there is now something positive about the changes that you're having rather than just perhaps some of the disruption. Jupiter going through the fourth house, which will be happening for all Aquarius risings starting May, that can be a time of upgrading or improving your home or your living situation so that you're getting to make things a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more enjoyable, a little bit more of a better fit for you. So that's what I would say for Aquarius risings about home and family and living situation. For Aquarius risings and career, the big thing that has been affecting career, because I think this particular piece is really relevant, is that you've had the transit of the South Node going through Scorpio and your 10th house. And that started in January of 2022. It will end in July of 2023. And so that can be a time of emptying out where career is concerned. Sometimes that means ending professional things. Sometimes that's an acknowledgement that there is some work or projects or people in your work life that are really draining and depleting. And so that can bring up some really big questions. And of course, if we have the South Node in Scorpio, it does mean we do have the North Node in Taurus in the fourth. So this question could also be getting into the nodal transit through Taurus and Scorpio, which if you're Aquarius rising is fourth house, 10th house, and the eclipses that are going through those parts of your chart. So second half of 2023 will definitely bring some relief because the nodes will no longer be in that fourth house, 10th house part of your chart. And the nodes together tend to agitate and unsettle things. And so if you're looking for things to kind of calm down or stabilize after the nodes leave, will be better. So that's what I would say for our Aquarius rising charts. I know before, like Pluto was going into Capricorn, we had a lot of questions from Capricorn rising charts. So I completely understand where those questions are coming from. There we go. Oh my gosh, we've gone through a few things. Do we want to do one final question, Steph, or
yeah, I've had a hard time deciding which one, but I think that this one is good. So this is from an Aries rising who's wondering about any upcoming standout transits that they should keep an eye out for.
Great question. So if you're an Aries rising, obviously your ruling planet Mars has been retrograde, maybe not a standout. So that was the last few months of 2020. And I think just generally having Mars out of the retrograde zone would be helpful. If you're an Aries rising, keep an eye on Mars by transit as it goes through the different zodiac signs, because some of your motivation and energy levels will shift according to the sign Mars is transiting through. So when I look ahead for 2023, I feel like Aries rising will get a nice benefit when Mars is in Leo, which I think is happening. I'm going to double check. I know it's in June, but I'm not sure exactly when it starts, but we'll find out in a moment. Mars comes into Leo late May, all of June, and early July. And then later in the year, we'll have Mars in Scorpio, which is a ruling placement for Mars, and that can be really helpful. That'll be mid-October to late November. It's just a general theme. But if you're Aries rising, you've also got Jupiter in your first house until May of 2023. So taking advantage of that in terms of personal growth, self-development, improving health and wellness, or just building self-confidence would be really a great thing to do for Aries rising with Jupiter in the first. And so the other big change, it's going to happen for all of us, but I'm thinking about this in relation to Aries rising charts. Saturn coming into Pisces. It's March 7th or 8th, depending on where you are. Saturn coming into Pisces for Aries rising means Saturn is coming into the 12th house. And that would definitely be something to be aware of in terms of wanting to make some space and time for reflection, for taking a break, for slowing down and maybe processing some emotions that are tied to the past. And if you're an Aries rising, that cycle of Saturn going through your 12th house starts in March of 2023. And really, it's going to hang around for almost 3 years. And so there is this sort of, let's take a walk into the mystical, emotional side of life. And to do that, you may have to kind of schedule or plan for periods of reduced productivity so you can do some internal work. So that would be something to keep in mind for the year ahead.
Lovely. I'm just laughing because I see, sorry if I mispronounce your name, but Delara wrote, my Aquarius rising husband just quit his job and we're moving to the other end of the world and they're going to start their own business.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. So that's with the nodes going across the 4th and 10th with Uranus there. Oh my gosh, how wonderful. That sounds so exciting. And sometimes I think life, if you're of the mindset that life is for living, it's not that I want you to be reckless and, make decisions where you'll have no money saved up for retirement or anything. But I also think that we have to have adventures and we have to try new things and get out of our comfort zone. And, Uranus transit, sometimes nodal transit, sometimes Jupiter transits, they can give us that little push. But oh my God, what a wonderful story to hear at the end of our time together today. Oh my God, thanks for sharing that. I guess before we wrap up, I probably should do one final mention about the membership promo. So that is on sale until Saturday. So it ends on the 18th. But if you're interested in timing your life with astrology, if you love hearing about upcoming transits and trends, I cover all of that in detail. Every transit, every day, every week is covered inside my astrology guide membership. And I'll quickly post the link again here. So if you would like to sign up, you can join us. There are 6 videos that are shared with members only every month. We do quarterly lives with members. So if you like this idea of a Q&A, we do that in a much more intimate setting. And that, as I said, there's an annual fee, which is already discounted off the monthly rate, but it is on an extra 20% off sale until Saturday. So if that's of interest to you, I hope that you will join us there. Thank you so much for being here today, Steph, and helping out with this. I really had a blast, and I know we can do this again, I feel like. So thank you.
My pleasure.
We figured out the technology, so we'll know what we're doing next time. It's total testing, but in the spirit of trying new things. So we wish you all a wonderful rest of the week, and we'll look forward to seeing